Night on Dragonstone wrapped itself around the basalt like a second skin. The wind carried brine and the crunch of unseen pebbles tumbling down the black cliffs. And in the high courtyard a dragon lay like a storm fallen to earth, coiled, patient, his scales swallowing moonlight. Daenerys stood beside Drogon with her hand against the ridge of his neck, feeling the latent heat under armor-thick hide. Every sound was naked in the hour before midnight. The sea spoke, the torches guttered. Somewhere, far down the steps, an unsullied helmet clicked against stone as a sentry shifted his weight. She could not rid herself of the echo of a word spoken on a wall beneath a foreign sky. Dracarys. Missandei had died with the wind in her hair, and when the sword had fallen it had split Daenerys down a seam that no healer could stitch. She had described fury for half her life without ever finding its true shape. Now she knew it, silent and hard-edged, cold at the center. Fury that could be put on a leash. Fury that could be taught to heal. Only the Red Keep, she said to Drogon, as if he needed telling. The dragon's pupil narrowed against the moon. He breathed once. Smoke curled from his nostrils, a thread of scent like pitch and iron. Footsteps came, steady and unwilling. Tyrion's outline hung there in the corridor, short, as if cast by a candle, but the shadow of his worry made him taller. He did not come closer than was safe. He had been struck more than once by the sheer force of Drogon's presence, the way it made walking feel like trespass. "I am going," Daenerys said. She did not turn. "Now," Tyrion said, the small word carrying the weight of all his plans, all his desperation. "At night, alone." "With Drogon," she said, and glanced back, so he could see her eyes. "I want them to have the city. I want the city to see morning." Tyrion lifted his chin and blinked, as if against sudden grit. "Maegor's holdfast sits within the Red Keep's heart," he said. "It is built to defy a dragon. There are scorpions on the walls and in the courtyards. Qyburn is no fool. I am not Qyburn's shadow to be measured by his lamp," she said. "He does not know the ways a dragon flies at night. He knows how stone falls," Tyrion said softly. "Do you? If the keep collapses, there are cellars below the southern wing. There are tunnels. If the ground moves, the walls may." He stopped himself, hearing what he had begun to say. He had secrets trapped in him that were already bleeding into the light. He could not call them. "I did it," Tyrion said, "because I believed, I still believe, that you are what you say you are, and that you do not need 2 more dead Lannisters to prove it." Drogon's eye rolled toward the little man. The dragon's tail tapped once against stone. The sound ran down the ribs of the fortress. Jon came from the stair as if pulled by that sound. He looked as if he had slept long ago and not well since. His hair was tangled by the sea wind. His face was the color of a gull's belly under moonlight. Despite all that he had been told, all that had been pressed upon him, he still wore the north like a mantle over his shoulders, a thing of fur and cold and duty, as if the south were a cloak he feared would catch fire at any moment. "You'll fly now?" he asked. "While the city still sleeps," Daenerys answered. "Before the bells, before the gates, before the merchants rouse their boys to roll casks toward the markets. I will kill the queen and the nest that hatched her, and I will not kill a city to do it." He swallowed and came nearer. Drogon did not so much as twitch. "You're sure the scorpions? Darkness is my ally tonight," she said. "Clouds are my shield. There are angles they have not thought to watch. Men who build engines for killing dragons think only of dragons they've seen. None of them have seen mine as he is." Tyrion turned to see as if to trade counsel for the comfort of a horizon. "If you pull down the holdfast," he said, "you'll pull down the Tower of the Hand. If you pull down the Tower of the Hand, you'll set the royal kitchens afire. The barrel vaults in the older cellars have been used to store oil and wine. Old things. Things you don't want to burn." "You think wildfire," Daenerys said. "I think Cersei," Tyrion replied. The name was a pebble thrown into a still bowl. It sent out quiet rings that touched them all. Jon's jaw shifted. The wind tugged at the fringe of Daenerys's hair where it escaped the braids. Daenerys said, "I know where the green fires burn. I know the smell. I learned it under a different sky. She remembered the pale flicker beneath the great pyramid at Myrene, and the glass candles in the warlock's house. She remembered her own hands reaching for heat that was not hers to hold. She would not let Qyburn's dead king rise beneath her feet. "You are my queen," Jon said. He said it as he might have said, "I must go," or "the wall is high," or "we are out of bread in winter." An iron sentence. A fact. "Look at me," Daenerys said. When his eyes came up, she said, "If I do this, and if they yield, there will be no sack, no taking of spoils. I will ask it of them. I will demand it of them. If my men cannot live with that, they cannot live with me." He nodded. He did not smile. He had never been a man who smiled before a battle was done. "I'll hold the men," he said. "I'll hold the Northmen, and the Riverlands, and the Dothraki. Grey Worm will hold the Unsullied," Daenerys said. "He will understand what it is to draw a line and not cross it. The Dothraki," she paused, thinking of their songs and the joy they took in a city's breaking. "They will ride to the gates and sing," she said at last. "If they break, I will break them." Tyrion's mouth opened and then closed. He bowed to her without flourish. "Then you are doing what kings dreamed of doing, and what queens were said to do but did not," he said. "You will cut out the rot and leave the house standing. I will not envy you the knife." "Do not envy me the night either," she said. When she climbed to the saddle, Drogon bent his head as if to accept a crown. He took the bit of her weight as a feather takes dew. His wings unfolded with a sound like a banner in a gale. Once, twice, and the air kicked them free of the stones. The cold hit her, clean and salt and whole. It scoured her eyes and brought tears that did not fall. The fires of the fortress fell away. Then the cliff. Then the sea pitched under them like hammered silver, and the stars were a scattered milk. She let Drogon climb until her bones knew the change of air, until her breath came harder and steadier. The cloud cover lay like a dark shore far above. She found a seam in it and slid into deeper dark. The shore became a boundary. The boundary smoothed into a long curve. Drogon's heat crept through her thighs, through her spine. She curved with him and pointed his nose toward the east where the water met a darker line. King's Landing slept. She could feel it. Not with magic, not with any sorcerer's sight, but because she had made war on cities before and knew the scent of them at such an hour. Bakers' ovens banked. Guard posts murmured. Whores' windows stood ajar like half-closed eyes. Men dreamed of fear in the city now. She could taste it in the air between gusts. Something like iron turned old and a candle blown out. She let Drogon drop through broken cloud as they crossed the last black mile beyond the mouth of the Blackwater. The river lay like a strip of no moon, a long laugh without a voice. Ships lay at anchor, their masts pinned like spears thrown up to hold the sky. Torchlight along the quays trembled and returned to itself. Somewhere there, a man with salt on his beard lifted his head and saw nothing but shadow crossing shadow. Drogon's wings beat twice, slow, measuring. She put her hand against the warm place where his neck joined his shoulder, and he tilted as a hawk tilts to listen to the wind beneath him. She could feel his attention, more immediate than any man's, more honest. He shivered, tasting scorpion oil on the air, metal and grease. He did not roar. They crossed the outer wall at a height that, in daylight, would have made her a banner against a pale arm of sky. Now she was a shape within a shape. The city opened like a palm, roofs cupped to the dark. Aegon's high hill rose from the hand's center, the red keep's silhouette a fortress of teeth. She did not look at the dragon pit on Rhaenys' hill. She did not look at Flea Bottom or the Street of Sisters or the market below the great September's empty square. She fixed her gaze on the old lion's den and on the thinner tower beyond it that housed Qyburn's newer wedded toys. The scorpions were there, in a ring of 6 atop the nearest battlement of the keep, their iron mouths open to the night though no torch burned to point their tongues. She had trained for such things now. She had learned to read darkness as a kind of map. With a pressure of her knee, she sent Drogon into a shallow dive. No shriek, no glow. The first pass was a whisper of shadow between half-built clouds. Drogon's fire burned coldly in his body. Contained. Leashed. The instant she allowed it free, it was as if a door had opened from a furnace onto winter air, a white-hot line drawn in brief, violent ink. He burned the scorpions 1 and 2 and 3 with lances of flame so fine they made no roar at first, only a shocked hiss like rain on a brazier. Metal warped and split and ran, and the night swallowed the noise. The men beside them, if they were men and not shadows, had no time to turn before their shadows unpinned them. She pulled Drogon up hard, feeling his chest heave. She tasted copper. The second pass took the western parapet. There were cries now, and a horn or two in the city below. Confused, half-sad sounds like cattle misplaced on snow. The scorpion bolts, she did not let them fire. She melted their strings. A single bolt loosed wild, and she felt it in Drogon's wing, the shudder as the air tore. It was a misjudgment of night. It was almost death. She banked him into the trajectory and let it pass close enough she could see the iron head turn as if wondering, then tumble into the dark. Within the keep, in a room where curving walls had been painted as an island, Cersei Lannister stood with her goblet and one hand splayed upon the reach where the harvests were drawn too generous. She had not drunk much. She had only held the wine and watched it cohere in a level moon. Qyburn's breath made small clouds where it leaked into the night through the arrow slits. The mountain was a shape behind them that barely belonged to human measurement. "Your Grace," Qyburn said, his lips working for kind words that would not be there, like the hands of a man reaching along a table for a knife that had been removed. "The engines are readied. Then we will use them," Cersei said. She was dressed for sleep. She had not slept. The shape of the child inside her showed only when she breathed out. She had dismissed much of the court. The ones who remained wore their fear like too bright jewelry, clumsy and obvious. "If she comes at speed from above," Qyburn began, and then the first heat ripple passed. It was not a sound. It was the knowledge of one. He moved to the slit and put his eye to it. In the darkness, something flamed and then stopped flaming and then flamed again, like a word spoken twice in different mouths. He felt the stone under his hand give back a little warmth as if from an old lover. "The parapets," he said. "The outer ring." Cersei did not go to the window. She downed the wine and set the cup aside with precision. "Send word to the Golden Company to hold their ground at the gate," she said. "If she means only to frighten the city, if she means to pick at my walls, we will not give her the day with a surrender in the night." "The Golden Company can hold the gate," Qyburn said, remembering a man called Strickland who had soft feet. He turned to the queen. "My lady, Maegor's holdfast is made for this." "Is it?" Cersei murmured. She put her hand where a bell tower, now ashes, had been painted too carefully. "Where is Jaime?" "He will come," Qyburn said, though he had sent no word and would not have known how to send it. He did not need to know. Jaime Lannister crawled onto a strip of shingle below the south wall with his sword left behind in the surf and blood following him like a hound. He had killed a man 10 minutes before, and the man had laughed as if it were the finest joke. "I am the man who killed Jaime Lannister," Euron Greyjoy had said, and then he had died with a look of surprise that anything could be that quick. Jaime felt the iron taste in his mouth and knew one of the cuts along his side had gone deeper than he would want. He spat and wiped his face with the stump of his golden hand and looked up at a wall that was not the worst he had ever faced. He had scaled a castle's back in a storm for less. He had climbed into unbearable places for more unbearable reasons. He found the postern door by memory and by the way the tide ducked and rose, pulling the water back from a space where rocks had been laid too carefully. The old key was in the old niche. He blew grit from it and fitted it with his left hand. It took time and pain. He pushed through into air that had been cellared for a century and a half. The smell of damp rope and old oil and a rat's faint city fear wrapped him. Ahead, torchlight crawled along a stone like a snail. He had thought about words along the way. They had ordered themselves and disordered and come back like men assembling at a levee who bring their own weapons from their own houses. He had considered apology and memory and had come round to the one true thing. "I am here." Words were never instruments to save them, he thought. Words were the sea that carried them to the next shore, where other things happened. He climbed. A tremor passed down the stair as if a giant had put one hand upon the keep. He paused, leaning against the wall, and the whole world seemed briefly to inhale. On the city's western side, Arya Stark moved like a blade through water. The hound lumbered beside her, the old limp showing when the ground tried to trick him. "You don't need to do this," he said without turning his head. "You want to kill her. That's 50 men between you and her tonight. And a mountain." "I'll pass the men," Arya said. "Will you?" he said. He lifted his face toward the dark keep and the sudden light on its crown. "Will you pass the fire too? I've seen what burning stones do when they fall." He stopped walking. The moon picked out the curve of his scar and the hollows the fire had made of him long ago. "Look at me. You want to end your life under bricks with a name on your lips." Arya's breath came steady enough. She had come to this city with the name on her lips, and she had sharpened it with each day of the road. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Live," he said. "You want to be her? You can. You want to be a thing that kills and kills until there's nothing else." He gestured with his head toward the keep. "Go ahead. But if you want to live, girl, turn around. I'm going up there. I know what I am. You don't need to be me." She looked at him and truly saw, that he was not old so much as finished with being anything but what the world had made him. She might become such a thing. She had walked its road and known the taste of it and found it like an iron coin under her tongue. She could spit it out. She had done harder things. "Thank you," she said. "Fuck off," he said. But his voice was softer than any she'd ever heard from him. He went. She stood a moment and watched the dragon. No, only darkness moving, lift above the broken teeth of the keep, then turned and ran. Gendry had said he would take a boat to the Dragon Gate if all turned to mud. She would not find him in this night, but running was as near to living as she knew, and she began to live. Above them, Daenerys measured a third pass and a fourth, taking only what she must. She had thought the keep would be louder as it died. But even dying it still held its long discipline. It had seen kings born and laid out, had heard rumors and promises and treason. She set the eastern tower alight in a tight ring at the base of the spire, and the tower hesitated and then sagged like a man stabbed in the leg. She burned the face of Maegor's holdfast where the drawbridge met stone, then arced to pour fire along the lintel of a lower hall that brought heat to the old beam beneath. Drogon blew, huffed like a bellows. She felt his satisfaction like a purr. A bell rang then from the south, a frantic clangor that could have meant fire or feast or birth. Another answered it from the Street of the Sisters, mismatched and brassy. Then another from some fishmonger's chapel. The city was waking. She had no wish to frighten it into fleeing it could not do. She banked Drogon for the heart of the holdfast, where the queen would be. She could almost smell Cersei's perfume, the one like bitter blossoms, too sweet for night. On the stair to the map room, Qyburn met the hound by accident and the mountain by intention. The air tasted of hot brass and limestone. Dust fell like a faint snow. The mountain did not appear to notice. Qyburn did. He noticed everything, and in all of it he tried to count how many heartbeats remained to him and how many he might best. "Spend. Ser Gregor," he said. "We will go down to the cellars." The hound had wanted this moment for so long that he had considered it his last prayer. He felt the old fear, the old rage. He wore them like armor and not like a wound. "Brother," he said and laughed. He was a man who laughed like a saw. "Turn around and look at me." The mountain turned around because the queen began to move and his orders shifted. He turned his blank heaven toward the hound, and the hound saw not a man but everything his nightmares had marched in to be. He lifted his sword. Qyburn reached for him as one might for a favorite vase falling. A stupid reflex for a man who had not lived to be of any use by putting himself between what he treasured and a hard floor. The mountain's backhand sent him spinning. His skull found stone with the clean thunk of a thing that fits, and Qyburn became a man without a single more thought left to him. "Go," Cersei said, standing on the edge of the stair with her eyes as round as if surprised by a jester's trick. "Both of you, stop it." She was speaking to children who would not heed. to men who no longer did her the dignity of men. Sandor Clegane smiled the first sweet smile of his life and raised his sword. The mountain came down on him with something too heavy to be named a sword any longer. They met in a space that had been used all day to hold the world's fates. The queen slipped by with her hands at her ribs, and the keep made a sound then. It was not a single sound. It was the sudden presence of too many at once. The battle of the brothers pitched suddenly down a stair that had ceased to be where it was and began to be somewhere else altogether. Daenerys saw the wall give along the lower face like a seam tearing at a dress's side. She took Drogon higher and then plunged him, not toward the wall but toward the galleries that held up the queen's apartments. She burned beneath the floors instead of the roofs, a bright hot line under the rafters that would break their will. She imagined the rooms above, the gilded chairs and the soft cushions and the table with its white cloth. In her mind, every piece of it had been bought with women's grief. A good queen did not need such chairs. A good queen needed a city that would outlast her. She took care not to give the fire away into the tunnels that ran to the river. The Great September had once been a light. Now it was a ruin. The catacombs beneath the keep were older than the Targaryen conquest and touched things planted when the first stones were laid. She would not wake a sleeping color. The Tower of the Hand groaned as its southern face slumped in, carrying 2 stories with it. The scream of twisting iron reached her, some hinge or tie tearing free, and she knew that in a moment much of it would collapse. She drew Drogon's head away. The dragon turned. She did not need to pull, and a spill of stone came away, sliding down like dry sand. Tyrion left the parapet for the yard. He had told himself he would remain on Dragonstone, that he would do nothing else foolish, that he would wait and measure and then be useful with numbers and words come morning. Instead he was in the Red Keep's lower bailey with blood in his mouth because he had bitten his cheek to stay quiet when an unsullied troop moved past, and he had almost shouted at them to save a girl caught in a doorway that had warped. He was not a hero. He had not been built for it. He did what he could with his hands, which had always been better at cups than at lifting, and with his height, which had always been less. He put his shoulder to a beam beside a man who had grown old in service, and together they made the smallest difference possible. Felt better than counsel. He found the passage under the Tower of the Hand the way some men find prayer. He went down. The air grew thick and cool, and he breathed as if a weight had been taken from him. He had dreamed of these cellars once. He had dreamed of what a man could keep here and what a man could lose. At the turn where the wall dipped, he set his torch in a ring and called a name that should not have been called in this place at this time. Jaime came back to him twice and then a third time with a voice behind it. Here, his brother said. It was not strong and not weak. It was only there. Tyrion ran then, a thing he did rarely. He skinned his shin and did not feel it. The passage dog-legged left. Beyond it lay an arch that had been partly dragged down by the shuddering of the stone above. Jaime stood beyond the fall with dust in his hair and a look on his face that Tyrion could not read, which frightened him more than anything else. Beside him stood. She looked for a moment like a girl lost in a market, Cersei. Tyrion stopped, the torch in the ring throwing light that made of his brother's wounds a painting. You, he said. He did not put hatred in it and did not put love in it. He put only surprise and perhaps something older. Tyrion, Cersei said. Her voice held awe as if she had discovered a magician at work behind a curtain she had always known was there. We need to move, Jaime said, and coughed. His side gave up a trickle. The arch, there's another way. There is, Tyrion said. He moved toward them without thinking of who he moved toward. He found where the ceiling had begun to fall and where a family of barrels had burst their hoops, and he thought of being a child under a table listening to music in dreams. He climbed the rumble like a man who had always been small enough to find his purchase on things that overcame other men. He offered his hand. Jaime took it without irony. Cersei did not take his hand. She did not slap it away. She stood with both of hers at her belly as if trying to hold the world inside. I don't want to die, she said, stupider than she had ever been. Tyrion looked at her, and for one small instant he saw her chasing cats in the keep's yard when she was 5 and he was new to Tanding. He saw her with her hair braided like a little queen in a story. He swallowed the memory the way one swallows a thorn. "Then come," he said. The ceiling spoke again. The world heaved left. Somewhere beyond, the Hound and his brother tore each other into pieces, and the pieces did not matter. Daenerys spared a glance for the river. The ships were moving, barges cutting their moorings with panic and intention both. On the quays men tripped and cursed and then found themselves on their knees because the bells began to ring in earnest, a riot of bells, and with them a cry that came in broken chords. "Yield." She drew Drogon higher. "Listen," she told him, her mouth near the heat of his neck. "Listen to them." He listened. He was not a man. He did not care for their cries. He cared for her hand and for the game of killing and not killing. She gave him another pass, low over the keep's heart. She sent a bright line like a surgeon's blade through the grain of the last support above the queen's rooms. The structure shifted. Drogon roared then, not battle but triumph. The noise of a creature who has solved a problem cunningly and knows it. Below, the queen's rooms stopped being rooms and became the idea of rooms. Cersei stumbled. Jaime held her with his left hand and the hand that was not a hand. It was enough. Tyrion found the crack he had been searching for. The one he had used in boyhood to follow a singer into places he did not belong, and turned into a side run where the smell changed. There was less stone there, more river. He led them with his torch and the prayer of a man who had not until that moment thought much of prayer. They came upon a passage banked by the black water, the old water, the water that remembered kings. It made a sound like a woman whispering to a child. The archway that would have led them through to the postern ground had sagged as if pressing its forehead to the passage. Tyrion pushed his shoulder under it and made a fool of himself trying to lift it and accomplished nothing but a bruised neck. Jaime put his back against it and strained, his breath ripping, and accomplished no more. Cersei pressed herself against the stone and murmured to it nonsense that made sense in such moments. "Please, please, please." The keep above them gave up a long piece of itself. The sound was honest and final. Tyrion let go of the arch as the dust came through in a soft sigh. He looked at his sister. She looked at him as if he were the only other thing alive in the world. "Go back," he told them. "There is another way." "Is there?" Cersei asked, sudden venom returning to fill the hole fear had made. The old woman he knew coming back to spit. "Another way I haven't taken." Jaime's lips drew back. He was smiling without joy. "There's always another way," he said. "Until there isn't." He sat down because his legs had decided the argument for him. He leaned against the stone and closed his eyes. Tyrion stood a long time there with his torch burning low and then said, "I will find a lever." He went to the barrels and the broken timbers and began to tug at each, piece by piece, small as a child at a threshing floor, useless as a prayer against a storm. Cersei watched him. Her breathing changed. He realized that she had begun to count, to measure, to make lists as she always had when she was cornered. She would inventory her life at the last. It was what queens did in the hour they ceased being queens. Above them, the dragon came low as a swallow and then hard as a spear, and the last stubborn upright of the keep's oldest heart gave up to heat. Fire raced along painted beams, leaped to tapestries, ate old oil with a quieter sound than men make swallowing tears. The bells did not stop. They multiplied. From the street of Hummingbird to the poor chapel near Cobbler's Square. They rang without judgment and without hope. They said only that something had changed. On the river gate, Jon Snow stood with a line of men who had come south believing they would freeze less and bleed more. He had his sword belted but not drawn. The Unsullied on his left were statues. Grey worms stood at their head with a shapelessness to him that came from the loss of name, of what a man might be called when he had no beloved. He watched the city as if watching a thief he wished to pardon and could not. "The bells," Jon said. "They surrender," Grey Worm translated, as if the sound belonged to a language. "The city yields." "No sack," Jon said to his captains and to the air. He went along his line and said it again, and then again in older words in the northern tongue, and then in the flat simple manner of a man who has given orders since he was 18 with more success than comfort. No taking, he said. No varning. You put down anyone who tries it. One of the free folk at his right spat on the stones and said, Shame. But there was no malice in it. There was habit and the shock of going against it. A cry began near them. It spread like an oil sheen across water. The gates opened. The men of the Golden Company stood in their gold that was less gold in night, and set down their pikes as one body lays down a bride. Strickland had been ready to run. Instead, he knelt with every art he had learned about how to be beautiful in defeat. Jon looked at him and saw nothing in him he could hate, and almost hated him for it. Dothraki riders came up the street of flower in a river of sinew and hair. They on their horses had been born in the eastern dark and knew ways to make noise with their throats that could kill a man's sleep in his mother's womb. They whooped, they pranced. Their eyes were already seeking the doorways and the silk coverings and the women whose men would be elsewhere. Jon put his horse across the front of them and raised his hand. The Unsullied lifted their spears in one movement to make a fence that was not meant to last long and would not need to if the will behind it held. Hold, Jerry. Why Worm called in the hard, sharp tongue of commands. The Dothraki might not heed that language. They heeded the line of points, the sense that something else fierce stood across their path. They hissed at the points and threw speculation in their own words that meant blood and then not blood. The front rider looked up, found Drogon in the sky, and laughed, which did more to hold them than any fence would have. Men do not hurry to offend a queen whose shadow can be found at night. Daenerys circled once more. She saw the pikes lay down. She saw the gate open like a mouth exhaling. She let the wind comb her hair out of its braided cage. Drogon settled into a slow, descending spiral that would set him down within the outer yard of the keep if the yard still existed. It existed in pieces, with heat rising from them like ghosts. She brought Drogon in with care, with the gentleness of a rider easing a stallion into a muddy ford. His ankled spurs found stone. He lowered himself further, spreading his weight. He coiled his tail in. When she dropped to the ground, her boots clicked, then stuck, then were sure again. She felt small and was grateful. Men came to her from the darkness in good armor, and with their weapons held not quite like men prepared to die. She raised her hand. Grey Worm emerged from smoke like a thought made flesh. "Your Grace," he said. She looked beyond him at the square beyond the broken gate where small folk had begun to gather in their nightclothes and their old coats turned inside out to catch luck. A child sat on his father's shoulders with sleep tilted at the corner of his mouth. An old woman with a scarf knotted at her chin crossed herself as if across some earlier faith. Daenerys felt their eyes like the touch of palms laid along her ribs. She stepped forward into the edge of torchlight. Drogon lifted his head behind her and loosed a small low sound that might have been the dragon equivalent of clearing a throat. "My city," she said in a voice that traveled and did not need to shout to do it. "Tonight I took your queen and your keep." It was not true. She had not taken them. She had broken one and was breaking the other. Cersei might still be breathing in a hole while men she had despised with even more flavor than her wine tried to dig her out. Daenerys said the word taken to give the night a line to draw around itself. "I will not take your houses," she said. "I will not take your children. There will be no fire in your streets because of me. The gates are open. The bells ring. If you raise a hand against my men, you will die. If my men raise a hand against you, they will die." She did not look back when she said it. She wanted Grey Worm to hear it as she wanted the old woman to hear it. A murmur ran. It was not agreement or relief. It was a species of astonishment. This was not how things were done. Cities taken by night ran red at dawn. Stories of dragons ended with weeping. She could feel their wonder. She did not drink it the way some did. She let it pass like rain over her lips. "Bring water," she said to those she could command. "Open the granaries. I have grain." She had thought that sentence for weeks now. It lived in her like a kernel. She would feed them with the weight she had brought from Essos, and in doing so she would teach them a new way to measure what a conqueror brings to a city. Grey Worm bowed his head. His eyes were deserts. "I will see it done," he said. At the river passage, Tyrion's torch guttered. He bit the inside of his cheek to taste blood and felt suddenly like a man at the edge of a cliff who begins to laugh because he cannot think of another thing to do. "I need a lever," he said again, as if the sentence itself would summon one. He found a length of beam that was less rotten than its neighbors and wrestled it with both hands and his shoulder. He got it into place beneath the slumped arch and had the unwelcome thought that he had once known a name for this particular stone form and its likely failure mode, and had let go of such knowledge to make room for drink. He put his shoulder against the beam. The world above him moved. He heard, as if far away, a new voice calling his own name. "Lannister!" It was hoarse and carried relief. "My lord!" He turned his head half an inch and saw one of the Red Keep's ratmen. Men who ran papers and chamber pots and secrets through tunnels, flitting at the margin of the torchlight. "The lower well," the man said, breathless. "My lord, the lower well runs to the dragon drains. It is not blocked." Tyrion stared at him as if he had spoken of ships that did not float. "The well house by the wardrobe stairs," the man said. "There is a plank, my lord. I can show you while I still remember what knowing a thing is." "Show me," Tyrion said. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled. The trick had saved his life a handful of times. It saved it again. "Jaime," he called. He pointed toward the Shadow Man. "There." Jaime hauled himself up. He took Cersei's arm without asking leave. "Come," he said. Her feet did not seem her own, but they remembered how to walk. They went back past the barrels and the crack and the small death of hope that had lived there 2 minutes before and turned down a side corridor that smelled of dry stone and spiders. The Ratman's candle was small, but he held it with reverence. He opened a low door in a wall that looked to be without doors. Beyond it, a black square yawned. The Ratman knelt and tapped at the frame with his knuckles. "The plank," he said. "It holds a little if you are held by others, but it will not hold you long." "Then we should be quick," Tyrion said. He set the torch in a ring again and knelt with his hands finding the worn smoothness at the lip of the well. He felt the old fear of water. He felt his father's hand pushing him against a plan. He spat, and the spit came back to them in the well's cool throat a second later. "There's a ledge," he said. "There is," the Ratman answered, his face with the shy pride of a child who has brought something plain to the king and found it wanted. "2 men taking a third between them can walk upon it." "I will go last," Tyrion said. Cersei looked at him. Her eyes were bright and rimmed with ash, and she seemed ready to tell him that of course he would go last. He always would. It was his fate. She said nothing. She went first because she was selfish first and because she was brave behind it. Jaime slid after her with his left hand on the stone and his body making a barrier between her and the fall. Tyrion came last, the Ratman ahead of him moving like a creature who had never known fear until men invented it. They moved along a ribbon 2 feet wide beside water that ran with a pace set by tides and old orders given by men now dead. Twice stones shook under them and they pressed themselves against other stones and counted, without being aware of counting, to a number inside their own private heads that made the fear go away. At a bend, the passage widened. The Ratman put his candle into a small bracket that had known candles before and said, "Here." Jaime went down first into the dragon drain. It was not grand. It stank. Rats had lived here long and would live here longer. Dragons had lived here once and would not again. He set his feet on rungs that were half gone and should not have held him. He went because men are foolish and because love is cruelty and because he had always been a man who went. He turned and reached for his sister. "Give me your hand," he said gently, as if offering her a thing she had not taken 1,000 times to use and discard. She took it. He braced. She came down, breathing like a woman in labor. Tyrion waited for the pause that would be his and took it, feeling the rungs give a little under his weight, feeling the well breathe around him. The Ratman came last and pulled the plank away and set it across the mouth of the well in a single practiced movement that made of his life a thing of art in that instant. "It will look like the floor," he said. "When they come with their spears, they will not know." "Who is they?" Jaime asked. "Who is always they?" the Ratman said, and grinned with his 3 teeth. "Those who find people." They came out at last into a space that had once been a place of fire and had been quiet too long. The dragon drain's mouth opened on the river. Water ran and choked with silt and secrets. Jaime went knee-deep in mud and then shin-deep in water and laughed in a small high sound that had not belonged to him since he was a boy stealing apples. Cersei stepped into the water and made a face as if she had been made to eat onions at court. Tyrion slid and caught himself and remembered that he had anger to attend to and a city to save, and that after he had saved it, he would have to find a way to live in it. Outside, the bells rang. The gates stood open with unsullied like iron flowers along the flanks. The Dothraki had found something better to do than take jewelry from women. They were racing their horses around a square for the joy of hearing them breathe. Jon was satiating fires with buckets. His hair had become a dark tangle of wet rope. A boy in ragged shoes bowed to him with such grave dignity that Jon bowed back, and then they both laughed and were embarrassed by the relief of it. Daenerys stood upon a broken stair and watched water carried past in a human chain, watched barrels rolled toward the plazas. She felt a tremble run through Drogon, and turned to see what he tasted. Men were coming from the river mouth, 3 of them, 2 of whom she would always know anywhere, one by height and one by the way his wryness made his mouth look even when it was not moving. She moved down the stair with that same careful care her dragon had used upon landing. Grey Worm moved to shadow her. The Unsullied fell in behind like thought following a decision. Tyrion saw her early and knew he would not have a way to hide what he had asked of the night. He lifted his hands, palms out, empty, a small man offering only what small men have. Jaime held himself beside the river as if the wound in his side would behave like a friend if he coaxed it. Cersei lifted her chin. She had lost a crown, but a chin was a crown of a sort. Daenerys stopped where the wet reached her boots and let the river speak. Said what rivers say, go on, go on, go on. She watched the faces of the 3. Tyrion first, not afraid, not sure, but present. She had learned to value men who remained present when what they feared most stood before them. Jaime second, a man undone who had undone many things. Cersei last. All gold drained from the gold. A woman caught with her teeth bared in a world that no longer allowed her to call herself anything but woman. You live, Daenerys said to Cersei, surprised by her own voice being so even. Cersei's gaze flicked to the dragon who lay draped across the stones like a bridge in a fable. For now, she said. There is surrender, Daenerys answered. It rings and rings your city. Her hand gestured lightly at the towers and the small spaces between them where men had begun to move like ants with purpose. Cersei said, It is not my city. No, Daenerys said. It isn't. Jaime coughed. It was a human sound in the midst of other kinds. Your Grace, he said. He would have bowed if he could have managed it. He did not try. Let it end here. It has ended, she said. The keep is mine. She looked at Cersei. You are under arrest. She had never used the phrase before. It tasted like metal. I will not kill you in the mud. Cersei laughed then. A short bark as shocking as a slap. You will not kill me, she said. I will not kill you, Daenerys repeated. Cersei's face made a shape between wonder and contempt. You think I will not find a way to kill you, she said. The old poison coming back, the only thing that gave her freshness. You thin. You will keep a crown while I live. Daenerys did not answer her at once. She turned instead to Tyrion. You freed your brother, she said. I did, Tyrion said. If there was a tremor in it, he did not show it. You did not free your sister. I did not, he said. You have betrayed me, Daenerys said. And you have saved lives. She could feel the weight of both truths. She could feel how easily the first might crush the second, and how the second might lift the first enough that it did not smother her. She remembered Varys' bones in the sand. She remembered a woman with no chains on her ankles choosing to sit beside her bed and tell her stories until the fear of sleep was over. She remembered Rhaegal's body falling into the sea and how it had felt like the loss of a part of her mind. I will not have you as a hand who moves my keys behind my back, she said at last. But I will have you as counsel who speaks to my face. If you disagree with me again, you will do it where I can see you. You will not open locks in the night. Tyrion bowed his head. It was not abasement. It was acceptance, and perhaps the smallest ounce of relief. As you say, he murmured. She turned to Grey Worm. Take the queen, she said. He did not hesitate and he did not hurry. He stepped forward with two unsullied. They were precise. Cersei did not fight. She said something small. So small that only Jaime heard it, and it was his name. He moved as if to follow. Grey Worm put a hand out. No, he said, plain as a wall. He is wounded, Daenerys added. He will be tended. Jaime looked at her. He had wanted to be told he would die before sunset, or that he would spend his days in a cell, or that he would be set free to make his own end. He had not wanted to be told to live. He sat and found that there was a comfort in the simplicity of it. The weight in his side sent messages up to his shoulder that made his left hand shake. He put his head back against stone that had been made before he was born and closed his eyes. He was a man with no swords to sharpen. It was a relief. Daenerys watched Cersei go. She had ended so many of her nights in imagination seeing that figure vanishing down a corridor for the last time. Seeing it now in a corridor made of men's bodies and spear points, she felt only a release like breath after a long-held note. It reminded her of the first time she had allowed herself to grieve for her brother's death. It had not been grief for him. It had been grief for what she had allowed him to make of her. She felt something alike now. She had allowed Cersei's existence to be her definition of a queen. She had broken that. Jon came to her across the square, his hair sticking and his clothes carrying ash and a child's handprint because a boy had clutched him when a stone had fallen and Jon had lifted the stone. He did not look like a king. He looked like a man after work. It made her heart shift against its bone. She smiled, and it surprised her by not hurting. You did it, he said, like a man naming the simplest thing. Drogon did it, she said, and lifted her hand to the great head, which came down like a familiar star and took her wrist gently between lips as soft as anything that size could be. The crowd murmured in awe. The dragon released her and she turned to Jon. The city surrenders. We will treat it as mine. He nodded. He looked around at the small faces, the frightened mouths, the bells still tolling themselves into a calm. You kept your word. That was for me, she said. If I break my own word, then I am only my father's daughter after all. I will not be her. I will not be him. We must feed them, Tyrion said, appearing again, because that was how he would be useful until he died. This will be a city of strangers in their own houses for a little while. It will be a city that has the cold shakes of a fever just broken. Open the granaries, she said, and he was already telling men in his half-remembered High Valyrian. He would make a good voice when hers would not reach. For now, his shame made him disciplined. For now, he would not drink. The dawn came with a grayness both clean and sorrowful. Smoke rose in slender pillars from the keep. Crows drew black lines across the light and then broke them with their wings. Daenerys walked the lower wards with Grey Worm and a troop of Unsullied. Children peered from doorways and women looked at her with a calculation that she respected. Men do not keep cities alive. They only break them and lift stones. Women keep them breathing. She would please them or she would have no city. She ordered the scorpions dismantled and their iron turned to hinges and nails. She ordered the courtyards cleared of stone before the kitchens were set to rights. She set 12 men to counting the stores left in Cersei's cellars and 10 to counting wine because men always count wine when they should count grain. She sent a rider north with a Ravenmaster's letter to Sansa Stark that said simply, King's Landing has yielded. I will not trouble your winter if your winter will not trouble me. We must speak of the north. The rider had done such things for so long that he did not think to wonder at being part of history. In the dragon pit, which had not seen a dragon caged in it for years, the Dothraki wrestled and sang, and, when they remembered, they looked toward the city and remembered they were part of it today and not apart from it. The Northmen found a cask and refused it because Jon had said so, grumbling as men do and grumbling while obeying. The Unsullied built a cook fire and sat around it in careful order, eating slowly, their faces like stone carved with patience. Grey Worm ate standing. then took his bowl and walked away and sat where the wind came off the river and looked at nothing. Daenerys went to him. He stood. "Do you wish her dead?" Daenerys asked, though she knew the answer and asked to hear it. "I wish her dead," Grey Worm said. "She will stand before her enemies and be judged," Daenerys said. "Then I wish the judgment to be death," he answered, and there was no fire in it. It was a flat word, a stone on the table, a fact. Daenerys watched him and thought of the island of Noth and of the men who had taken Missandei when she was small. "After," she said, "there is a thing I can give you and there is a thing I cannot." He did not ask her what they were. "I want to go to Noth," he said. He spoke the name like an oath. "You can," she said. "You can go with as many of your soldiers as you wish to take. You can keep its shores and make a circle that men will not cross." He closed his eyes. It made him look younger and nothing could make him look young. "And the thing you cannot give," he said. "I cannot give you her," Daenerys said. He opened his eyes. He bowed not deeply, but with depth. "Then give me Noth," he said simply. "I will," she answered. In a week's time there were carts moving grain up the street of steel. In 10 days men laid planks across broken culverts and watched water behave itself. The Red Keep still smoked at its heart. The throne room had become a chapel without saints, a place where ash lay in drifts and the Iron Throne reared like something that had survived a fire only because it had been born out of one. It surprised her. She knew it should not. She went there alone with Drogon's scent still in her hair, and she walked through ash that had once been curtains and books and a set of wooden toys left behind by a boy who had been allowed indoors for one afternoon while people debated what to do. The light came down through a place where the roof had been, and it made a mist of the ash where it fell. The throne sat at the far end under that light as if chosen. She felt suddenly the weight of all named Aegon bending the air, and of all who had knelt and knelt and not risen. She did not sit. Not that morning. Not while ash settled like slow rain. She circled it, seeing the dark folds where swords had been bent into other swords. She said quietly, to the empty room and the ghost of her brother who had wanted this, and to the ghost of herself who had wanted only anything that would mean home, "I have it. That is not the same as it having me." The crunch of boots in ash, careful and unwilling. Jon came, stopping when his hands were full of the sight of her and the thing behind her. He did not know where to look. He looked at her. It made her able to breathe again. "You won," he said, and then, after a beat, because it needed saying, "And you kept them alive." "I had help," she said, "from bells, and men with barrels, and my dragon." He stepped closer. He had a solemnness about him like certain trees. "I can forgive a queen anything but forgetting her people," he said. "You did not forget them." She could not help herself. She reached and put her hand flat against his chest. He did not step away. She felt the salt-dry cloth and the human heat beneath and the steady beat that had once set her on fire. It did not set her on fire now. She had burned much of that in another city. In its place was something deeper and colder and better. "The North," she said. He smiled. A shock every time, a weak sun through cloud. "The North." She withdrew her hand. "I will not force you to kneel," she said. "I will not force Sansa to bend. I want a world where men bend to those they must and not to those they fear. I am tired of wheels." "Then I will bend in friendship," he said. "In alliance. I will make the North strong enough to be your wall. But I cannot call you my queen in my hall." "You will call me it here," she said. He nodded. "I will," he said. He did not say he already did. He did not say she had made him say it long before. "I will call the lords," she said. "I will call them not to kneel, but to speak." The thought startled her with its own boldness. It did not sound like a girl with a crown, or like a king like her father. It sounded like an idea she might want to live with. Let them come and see a throne that did not eat them. Let them eat and then tell me what they want for their people. Some of them will want my head. Some will want my bed. Most will want my granaries. They will want what they always want, Jon said. To count their sheep and keep their daughters safe long enough to hand them to men. Then we will give them a summer to do it, she said. She looked at him with an old tenderness that did not carry the old wildness but did carry its loyalty. "Come home to Winterfell when the rivers run again," she said. "Come when the grain shakes out." "I will," he said. When the day for Cersei's trial came, the square that had once held a sept and now held only stones crowded with people wearing the faces of those who have seen the wheel turn and do not trust its new edge. It struck Daenerys that this would be the part of being queen she would dislike most. Not the judgment but the theater. She sat beneath a canopy because the sun was loud and because the city needed symbols. The Iron Throne did not come to squares. The throne had its own cave. She had a simple chair with arms. She ran her fingers along the grain without being seen to do it, taking comfort in wood where she had expected there to be only metal in her life from now on. Tyrion stood as her voice and read the charges. He did not embellish. He named what Cersei had done with cool precision, as if counting coins aloud. Wildfire, murder, treason, oath-breaking, slaughter. He named the dead and let their names stand alone like pillars. Cersei did not flinch. She looked at the people and saw that they did not roar for her or for anyone. They looked at her as one looks at a piece of a storm that had blown down a familiar tree. When asked if she had anything to say, Cersei lifted her chin and said, "I did what I had to do. It was not brave. It was an old stone, and it fell into a river that did not splash." The city was done with her. She saw it, and something in her went quiet with the knowledge. She looked briefly at Jaime where he stood with a clean shirt and a pallor and a strap tight above his bandage. "I will not have her torn apart," Daenerys said afterward to Grey Worm in her tent where the canvas moved with the dragon's breath, where Jon had left her to her choices because men who love queens must sometimes let queens be queens. "I will not have her burned. I will not make a story for them to tell children to make them sleep poorly." "What will you have?" Grey Worm asked. "Give her a room where the light is only in the morning and let her walk in a yard where the sky is a square," Daenerys said. "Give her books. Give her things to count. Take none of her fingers. Take her name. She will be Cersei. She will not be queen. She will live in that. And it will be enough punishment for a woman who loved crowns more than life." Grey Worm considered this. He had known knives thin as straw and had used them. He had never been taught this kind of cut. "It is done," he said. "The city lived. It did not live because Daenerys ruled. It had lived under worse and would live when better had gone to sand. It lived because people lifted water from a river and poured it into a different place and then carried it into their homes and made it into tea and bread and washing. Daenerys learned to love the sound of buckets. She had always loved the sound of wings. She added to it the music of mundane salvation. When a cart overturned on the street of fish and spilled eels into the filth, she rode past and saw men laughing and women scolding and children darting to snatch and a dog who had never used the words of men knowing how to be at the right place at the right time. She felt in her that she had done a thing that allowed that laughter to exist that morning. There were nightmares. There would always be nightmares. Regal dying had put a shadow in the corner of her sleep that no light could erase. She woke sometimes with her hands hot and with her mind chasing a face through fire that turned toward her and was not Cersei's and not her own. She learned to live with that too. She learned to eat simple things at dawn and not to demand her stomach be ready for feasts when her soul was not. A month later, the lords came. They came with their worries and their hands out and their mouths opening to speak and then closing again to see if someone else would speak first. Sansa came with a face that had learned to carry fairness and fear both without showing either. She and Daenerys sat together long in a long room that had once held armor. They did not drink wine because both preferred their words steady. It was not friendship and not war. It was something like two women telling each other carefully what men had tried to do to them and how they had decided not to let it happen anymore. "The North will be its own," Sansa said. There was no thorn in it. It was a statement of whether. "It will," Daenerys answered. "I will have your friendship and your promise that your wolves do not bite my geese." "You will have both," Sansa said. They did not embrace. They nodded, and it felt like the way seasons meet. Arya watched the sea and found, as she had always known she would, that a horizon is a thing to put one's teeth into. Gendry asked her to stay. She kissed him with a gentleness she had not had when she was younger and felt the world error around her for a precious moment. "I am not a lady," she said. "Not with the pride of once, and not with shame either. I am a point in the distance. I will walk there." He smiled because he had learned to love the ache and because he carried pride in his chest like a man carries coals through a blizzard to his sleeping family. "Go," he said, and when he said it his lungs burned. He would keep that burn to warm himself through winter. Grey Worm sailed with 100 unsullied for Noth. Daenerys stood on the quay and watched the ships grow smaller and smaller, and she was glad they grew smaller. She had learned to be glad when men left her for something like peace. She imagined a beach with no chains and a song in a language she would not learn because it belonged to those whose home it was. She did not wish to rule that. She wished to guard it at a distance. Jaime learned to live with one more scar and with the knowledge that men in markets would say, when pointing, that he had once loved a woman who had loved a throne, and that he had left both behind. He found a forge on the street of steel, and he watched boys learn to strike iron, and he let the sound do a thing to him that was not healing and was not torment. He was, for once, nothing to no one. He had never been that. It was an odd diet, he found he could survive on it. Tyrion came to the queen by night with figures and left by morning with promises and came again at noon with news of a guild beginning to ask for weight it did not need. He remembered his father's hand at his neck and his father's sayings and put his hand on the back of the chair before her and leaned in enough to make his point and not enough to be reckless. He did not drink. He found that there was pleasure in not drinking. It came tweedled with pain, and he learned to take them together. Jon went north with messages and came south in winter with furs and a face that had thawed and sometimes did not. He was happy in the way of men who do not know they are until someone takes it from them. No one took it. He learned to rest in a chair by a hearth in a house that once belonged to men who had used it to plan a war. Daenerys learned all at once how to be a queen and how not to be one. She learned to say no to men who wanted to write their names upon her policy like boys carve upon bark. She learned to say yes to old women with bruised blue veins who asked only for enough oaten flour to see their neighbors through until the river dropped. She learned to it with her dragon's head in her lap and not think of what he would be when she was bones. She learned that sometimes the best moment in a day is when the bells ring for noon and nothing has burned. On the anniversary of the night she had taken the Red Keep without taking the city. She went up to the highest place that still stood and let the wind talk in her hair. She thought of a girl who had walked a hot street in another city with 100 men behind her and 1,000 more beside her, shouting her name as if it could split clouds. She thought of a young woman who had bargained with slavers and tried to buy souls with money. She thought of a stranger who had crossed the sea in a bad boat with a good heart and a terrible anger. She thought of all the ways the night might have gone otherwise, of fire in the market and screams, and men writing songs that mothers would sing to make their children fear. She let the thought pass the way a woman lets a lover go. She had not done that. She had done this. Below her, the bells rang for vespers. They sounded like ordinary mercy. The city breathed, and it breathed with her. The Red Keep was a scar across its brow, not a wound that would not close. The river kept going. The sea kept calling. She rested her hand on the stone and felt it hold the weight without complaint. "Dracarys," she said softly to the wind that had brought her here and would bring her away one day. It was a different kind of word now. It meant not fire but change. Drogon shifted behind her, the long rumble of the sound he made as familiar as her name. She turned and smiled at him, and he opened his mouth and let smoke escape like a man letting out a breath he too had been holding all year. Night gathered again, and this time it held no last banking of rage in its corners. Fires burned where fires should. In the squares people told the story of the queen who had killed only the castle while the city slept. They told it because people love stories with a knife in them that cuts the right thing. They told it because they wanted to believe that sometimes the wheel turns and does not crush. They wanted to believe it enough to make it true. In time it became a thing children could play at in alleys with sticks for wings and stones for towers. That was a kind of rule, too. A place written for her in the laughter of a city that had not burned. She accepted it and went home,